I'm the lead iOS developer here at Viaplay. And I'm really excited to have you all here today to talk about the new Apple TV in a presentation I call Introduction to tvOS. Now, I saw many hands in the air when Alec asked about a new Apple TV, so I'm sure you all know about what Apple has showed. It's a new hardware with a new OS based on iOS, and it features a new app store. So apps are no longer bundled with the Apple TV, but instead they are available to download in the App Store, and anyone can publish their own applications. Before I start, I want to clear up two misconceptions that's been out there I see online on Twitter with the new Apple TV. First, tvOS is only available for the new Apple TV. It's not available for the old Apple TV. The old Apple TV will still be sold. It will still be available with the bundled apps and everything, but there will be no tvOS, no App Store on it. The second misconception I see online is about the Siri remote. The same hardware will be available in all countries. It's just that Siri is not available in, for example, Sweden to start with, but it's still the same hardware and still the same remote, and it's still called the Siri remote. Now, I'm really excited, like this excited about the new Apple TV. No, this had to use the US region. I'm really excited about this because suddenly we can take all the tools and the skills we have acquired over the years doing iOS development and translate them into building new apps on the big screen. And you see people saying, "Oh, I have 5 years experience of tvOS development," and that's almost true because we have been doing iOS development. Don't put that on your CV; that's not okay. But you get what I mean. We already know how to do this, even though it's a new platform. So in this presentation, I'm gonna go through a quick overview of the tvOS SDK as a whole. I'm gonna dig into UIKit for tvOS. I'm gonna talk a bit about how you can share code between platforms if you already have an existing Mac or iOS application. And finally, I'm going to talk a bit about how you can distribute it in App Store. So, let's get started with the tvOS SDK. Now on iOS, we have only had one category of applications, which is native applications. You build them in Swift or Objective-C or any other language of your choice. But in the tvOS, we actually have two kinds of applications. We have the client-server applications in addition to native applications. Now, these apps are hosted on a server, and you write the logic in JavaScript, and you create your UI using XML templates that Apple has created for you. Now, these templates are actually very limited, and they only have one real purpose, which is media applications. Apple has explicitly stated this when they launched the client-server SDK for tvOS, which is this is to build apps like the one we have at Viaplay or our other competitors out there that show a list of content and allows you to browse and watch stuff. And these templates can do that stuff very easily. You get a lot of bang for the buck with these templates. And they're really gorgeous. You have the grid that shows you a list of content. You have a title page, which allows you to see more information about a specific piece of content, maybe a movie. And of course, there's a search page as well. And these are just a few of the many templates that are out there. But if you want to do any kind of customization, or you want to do any other kinds of app than a media application, then you should go with native apps. And this is all the things you already know how to do. It's the same frameworks as we have available in iOS and on the Mac. We have UIKit for the UI. We have SceneKit and SpriteKit for doing games. We have OpenGL and Metal to do low-level graphics. We also have AV Foundation to do media playback. Core Bluetooth if you want to integrate with your peripherals. So all these frameworks that you find on tvOS, you are already familiar with from iOS. Now there are some limitations that are unique to tvOS and the Apple TV. First of all, there's no persistent local storage. That means that you can't store stuff and expect it to be on the device after the app has exited. There is still on-disk cache you can use, but it's not persistent across longer than the life cycle of your application. There's a 200 megabyte limit for when you download the application from the App Store. If you have more data than that, you can use the on-demand resources as part of the iOS 9 SDK. But the app itself, or the binary you initially download from the App Store, cannot be more than 200 megabytes. The next point makes me a bit happy. No web views. This makes some people upset, but I think it's a good thing. And web views are hard to interact with when you have the Siri remote, so it makes sense to not have web views on tvOS, but it's a limitation for some people. And there is no API yet for the universal search. Tim Cook publicly confirmed a few days ago that there will be an API for third-party application makers, but initially Apple will only allow their preferred partners to use this API. And they have removed a lot of the deprecated APIs, especially in UIKit. So if you're relying on old APIs to do stuff, well, you should switch to the new way now, because the deprecated APIs are mostly removed. Now, let's talk a bit about UIKit for tvOS. I could stand here and I could talk about what's similar in iOS and tvOS, and that would be a very long and boring presentation, because UIKit on tvOS is mostly the same. It's the same APIs, it's the same components, it's the same framework you're used to on iOS. And the APIs work the same way. The only difference between UIKit on iOS and tvOS is the appearance of the components. Buttons look different, tab bars look different, collection views look different, but you still have the same APIs, which allows you to customize and make whatever app you want. But there's one new concept in tvOS in UIKit called focus. Now, if you have used the Apple TV, or you played around with the simulator, or you saw the keynote, you've probably seen this. When you navigate around the tvOS, items get highlighted on the screen. Now, this is called focus in tvOS. A focus-based interaction is the only interaction model we have in the tvOS. On iOS, we have a touch-based interaction model, because we have a touchscreen and we have fingers to touch things. But on tvOS, we have a remote. And by swiping on the remote, we change the focus on the screen. Now, when we're working with a focus-based interaction model, there are a few limitations, or a few rules. One item can only focus on one item. Unlike a touchscreen with multi-touch, where you can interact with multiple items at the same time, with focus you can only interact with one item at a time. When you're navigating, you're triggering a focus update. Now, I will talk more about focus updates later, but this is important to understand, because it means that we can control and impact the focus updates, and we can react to those and make changes in our application. And this might seem obvious, but UIKit only supports the focus-based interaction model on tvOS. There's no other way to interact with the Apple TV. We don't have a keyboard and a mouse. And where Apple has created something called the focus engine, which controls the focus movement for you. So when you swipe to the right, tvOS automatically figures out for you which view is to the right. So you don't have to tell UIKit which item should be the next one. It automatically figures it out for you based on the position of the views and a bunch of other properties. And this is good, because by just putting elements on the screen, you get default behaviors on tvOS. You don't have to spend time implementing these behaviors over and over again. You can spend time implementing what's important to you, which is the appearance of your application. But the focus engine takes care of all the behaviors for you and keeps them consistent across all different applications. Now, if we look at focus in UIKit, we see that only interactive elements are focusable by default. And this makes sense, because a label, you can't interact with it, so why would you want to focus on it? But there is no default appearance for focus, for views when focused. So each element defines its own focus appearance. And different kinds of elements have different kinds of appearance. For example, UI buttons, they grow in size, they add a shadow, and they change color when they become focused and unfocused. Image views, when put inside a view that can become focusable, will increase in size and add a shadow to show you that you are focusing on the item. Now, if you just put a bunch of UI views on screen and you make them focusable, this is the result when you're navigating around. You don't get anything. For all you know, this is a screenshot. Maybe it's not a video. It's just nothing happens while you're focusing around on the different views. Now, when you're working with focus, there is something called the UI Focus Environment Protocol. Now, this is implemented by classes that controls views. So, for example, a UI view controller, a UI window, or a UI presentation controller. And this protocol has two purposes. One, it notifies you about focus updates in your view hierarchy. So when your focus changes or any of your children views changes focus, then you get notified about that. And it allows you to control these focus updates. So we can maybe change focus to another view, or we can stop a focus change from happening. Now, when you get notified about a focus change in tvOS, you get access to the UI Focus Animation Coordinator. Now, the purpose of this object is to animate your focus changes for you. Now, you might ask, well, we already have UI View Animate with Duration, and we have all these Core Animations APIs. Why should I not use them? Well, the reason is Apple wants to control the animation timing for you. And the reason for that is to keep the behaviors consistent across different applications. For example, focus animations are faster than unfocused animations in tvOS. And that's to create a trail effect while you're quickly navigating across items. And if Apple didn't control the timing, it would be impossible to keep this behavior consistent. So do not schedule your own animations. Should not do it when you get a focus change. But if you want to do things where you want to have more control of the timing, you can always nest animations inside this coordinated animation and inherit those properties. So maybe you want an animation that's a bit delayed from the initial focus animation. Well, you should nest it inside the coordinated animation. So let's have a look and see how these APIs looks in practice. Now, for this demo app, I put together something really amazing. You see, I'm a busy man, so I don't have time to watch all the TV shows coming out. For example, Lyxfällan, we have here at Viaplay. They produce new seasons and episodes all the time. So to save time, I've created an application that allows me to see one whole season of Lyxfällan at the same time. This is binge watching 2.0 to the next level. It plays 12 episodes at the same time. And it's very simple. It's actually a view controller containing a bunch of custom views. That means that we have to implement our own focus appearance. Now, doing that is actually very simple, and it only requires 2 steps. In your UI View subclass, you have to tell the focus engine that we can become focused. And you do this by overriding the can become focused method. And in this case, I always want the view to be focusable, so I'm going to return true. Then we're going to override did update focus in context. Now, this method, as I said, is called when either my focus changes or any of my children views focus changes. And I can add my coordinated animation to that. So when I'm focused, I'm going to increase make the view visible, and I'm going to scale it up a bit. And when we become unfocused, I'm going to add some transparency and shrink the view. Now, we have to remember that unfocused is the default appearance for a view in tvOS. So you have to set that up when you're initializing your view. So this is going to give me the behavior you saw in the video. Now, this app is really awesome, but it's missing one thing, which is I'm not sure what I'm watching. I want the title to change along with the focus changes, so I can actually know which episode of Lyxfällan I'm currently watching. And we can do this very easily as well. This time, we're going to once again override did update focus in context, but we're going to do it on the view controller that owns these views. And because the views are a children of this view controller's view, we're going to get notified about these updates. And in this case, we also get access to a context object, the UI Focus Update context. Now, this object contains 3 things. It contains the previous view that is becoming unfocused. It contains the next view that is becoming focused. And it's containing the direction of the update. So in this instance, I'm going to grab the view we are about to focus. I'm going to make sure it's the right kind of view. And if it is, then I'm going to grab the title from it and set it to the label. So this is going to give me the behavior we saw with the title changing. Now, there's one last thing I want to show you in this application, which is how to programmatically trigger focus update. Because all these focus updates you have seen on the screen have been created by the user by swiping on the remote. But this time we actually want to change the focus from our code. So I've implemented that when I press the menu button on the remote, we jump back to the first episode in the grid. And doing that is quite simple as well. First, I have to create a tap gesture recognizer. And in tvOS, we can specify the allowed press types. In this case, I'm going to set it to UI press type menu, which means that this tap gesture is only going to be fired when I'm pressing the menu button. You can use it to set any combinations of the select button, the play pause button, and the menu button. Then, in the method that's called by the tap gesture, I'm going to request a focus update by calling set needs focus update. And then I'm going to call update focus if needed to force an focus update to happen right now. Now, if you have been doing layouts programmatically in iOS, you're going to recognize this pattern by doing the set needs update and the update if needed. Then you're going to realize there's one thing missing here, which is I'm only requesting an update. But how do we tell it what we want to update the focus to? We do that by overriding a method called preferred focus view. And this works like a responder chain. It's going to start at the top of your view hierarchy, and it's going to go down until it finds a view that wants to become focused. So in this case, I'm overriding it on the view controller, and I'm telling it that my player view, the first player view, should be the focused one. You have to remember that this method can be called anytime a focus update is requested. So don't make any stupid assumption in this method. In this case, it works out because when you enter the view controller, I want the first player view to be selected. And when I programmatically do a focus update, I also want the first view to be selected. But be careful with the logic in this method. So that's how you work with focus in UIKit. I think it's quite simple, and it's introduces a few new concepts. But I think Apple have done a great job with abstracting this and making this easy to implement for US developers. Now, let's talk a bit about sharing code. Many of you in here probably have an iOS app out there already. Maybe it's your own, maybe it's the project you're working on for the company you work at. And you want to port that iOS app to tvOS. Now, this is a great opportunity to actually reuse some code and share some code between your applications, because it would just be stupid to just rewrite everything from the beginning. Unless, of course, you have put everything into one file called stuff.m, then you have a problem. But if you have been a good developer, and maybe you have followed the model view controller principle, we can see that there's quite a few pieces of information and code we can share between the applications. Models are usually easy to share because they are not connected to the UI. Some of the controllers might be easy to share as well, like you have an API controller that communicates with your API that's not directly tied to the UI. We can share that as well. But controllers like a UI view controller that's tightly coupled to your UI might be harder to share. So you have to think about and see in your application what you can share and not share. And views are also usually hard to share because they are directly tied to the user interface you want to provide. And the user interface is quite different on tvOS and iOS, but it's not impossible. So if we look at, for example, one example inside the viaplay iOS application, at the model layer, we have the metadata for the things you see when you browse around the application. At the controller layer, we have API clients that communicate with our APIs. And at the view layer, we have our navigation. Now, clearly, the metadata and the API client we can share, but the views are not possible to share in this case because it's so tied to the iOS experience. But that's not a hard rule. If we look, for example, at our video player, you can see that we can share a lot more. We can share the metadata for the videos you're watching. We can share the video player, which is the controller in this case. But we can also share the UI, because the way we display video and subtitles and metadata along with it might be consistent across different platforms. So there are no hard rules. You have to sit down, you have to look at your application and think about what can I share between my iOS and tvOS app. If you don't ever have any experience with doing this, there's a great session from Apple called Sharing Code Between iOS and OS X. It's a presentation by two engineers from the iWork team at Apple, and they talk in depth about how they decided what to share between the iWork, iOS and Mac apps. In this presentation, they also talk about how you should share it, how you should set up your product structure to easily share code between the platforms. And I want to present their recommended approach because it's an approach I have tried and used, and I think it works very well. So first, we're going to set up a workspace to contain everything we have. In this workspace, I'm going to set up a project for the shared code. And it's going to be a framework, a dynamic framework. And I'm going to call it libshared. And in this project, and this is key, I'm going to have 2 targets. I'm going to have one iOS and one tvOS target. There are 2 separate targets within the same project, so we can still share files between them. We can have the same source code in them. But by having 2 separate targets, it also allows us to have some platform-specific code in each target. And when we're working with third-party dependencies, this makes life a lot easier. Then, of course, we're going to have a project and a target for the iOS app, and a project and a target for the tvOS app. And then, as you might guess, the iOS app is going to link against the iOS version of the framework. And the tvOS app is going to link against the tvOS app of the tvOS version of the framework. Now, when you're doing this, I recommend using dynamic frameworks. And they're great because they include binary and the headers and resources you might have, like images. So you have everything bundled together in one nice package. This makes them easy to build and use standalone. Many of you might only want to share code inside your own project, but you might want to share code with others as well. Maybe you're making a framework you want to distribute to third parties. Distributing a framework is much easier than distributing a static library or even the source, which you might not want to do. The limitation with dynamic frameworks is that they require iOS 8 or newer. But I don't think it's going to be a problem for most of you guys out there. And when you're working with third-party dependencies, especially when you have multiple platforms involved, you should weak link your dependencies. Now, what does that mean? Let's say I have AF networking in my framework, and someone else also makes a framework with AF networking. If you add both frameworks to your project, you get a collision, because we have 2 sets of every symbol from AF networking. So what you can do instead is weak link, and that means that when you're building the framework, it will compile against the headers and look at the information from the library, but it will not include those symbols in the final built product. This means, though, that the person using your framework will have to include those dependencies as well. So you have to tell them that, you should use AF networking version, whatever. But it's worth it in the long term, and it makes your framework play nicely together with other frameworks. When we're working with dependencies for tvOS, there's a few things we have to keep in mind. These dependencies has to be built for tvOS. iOS and tvOS are very similar to each other. It's basically the same underlying operating system. But you still have to build your dependency for tvOS. And this is not a problem if you have access to the source code, because you can just set up a new target and build a tvOS version of the framework. But if you're using third-party frameworks that you don't have access to the source to, that might be a problem for you. If you're using dependency managers, you need to use CocoaPods version 0.39, which is in beta right now, to get tvOS support. And if you like using Cartridge, you can do so as of 0.9, which was released a few weeks ago. If you want to know more in depth about how to set up the project and how you should configure your build settings and all the technical details, I once again recommend this session. The first half is about how you should share, what you should share, and the second half is how you should share it. Yes, and then finally, the App Store, because we want to distribute our app as well. Now, the App Store on tvOS is, as you might expect, very similar to the iOS App Store. But you have 2 options when you start distributing your tvOS application. One, you could sell it as a new application. And this is just as any iOS application. It's a new product in iTunes Connect, and you can sell it separately with a separate price and everything. But Apple also introduced a new concept called Universal Purchase, which allows you to get both an iOS app and a tvOS app with a single purchase. Now we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Worth knowing with the Apple TV is that all beta distribution has to go through TestFlight. Because we don't have a browser, we can't use a service like Crashlytics or Hockey App or anything like that. We have to use TestFlight, unless you like distributing betas manually and installing them through Xcode. And when you're distributing your app in the App Store, you have to have a parallax icon. It can be a very simple one. It can be just 2 layers, a background and an icon. But it has to be one of those nice parallax icons which jiggle when with the remote. And of course, we have the same rules as in the iOS App Store. There's, it's not a free haven like the Mac. You have to follow the rules that Apple sets. So no distributing things Apple don't want you to. Universal purchase. As I said, it's single purchase for both applications. And that also goes for in-app purchases. And what you do is in iTunes Connect, you set up separate binaries and versions for your tvOS and your iOS application. So it's not like on iOS where a universal binary is both iPad and iPhone in the same binary. These are two separate binaries, and they have separate versions in iTunes Connect, so you can distribute them using independent release cycles. You don't have to release them at the same time. But it's going to be one price, and it's going to be the same regions. So you have to have the tvOS app available in the same regions as your iOS application. But it's a good thing, and you have to think about how it fits your business model. Do you want to sell the tvOS app for more money, or if you're have an application that where selling the app is not your primary business, then universal purchase is a convenient way for users to get access to both your applications at the same time. They're not automatically installed though. On iOS, if you buy an app on your iPhone, it will automatically download to your iPad if you have set up App Store that way. That doesn't work with tvOS. You still have to go into your App Store and tvOS and download it. Yes, that's a brief introduction to tvOS. I saw many hands in the air, so I'm really excited to see what you guys are going to make with tvOS. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for us developers that, all these skills that we have been working on for many years suddenly gives us access to make a brand new platform and brand new applications and business ideas. And it's really cool to go from, we had the small 3.5-inch iPhone screens a few years ago, and now we're, on the big screen. And I think it's going to be really exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys can build using tvOS and the new Apple TV. So thank you guys for listening.